All right, everyone. It is, what day is it? Oh, Tuesday. And we have another version of the MSP Initiative Live. We bring back longtime friend of the show, Mr. Brad Gross, attorney extraordinaire is probably the best
That's
way
me,
to say it.
attorney extraordinaire. I accept that.
There you go. There you go. How you doing today, Brad? Looks like you have some good weather behind you.
I do. Welcome and hello from sunny South Florida. I figured, you know what? It's a nice day out, not too crazy hot. So I said, let's take a nice scenic view of the back in the driving range that is in Weston, Florida.
There you go. There you go. Well, Florida seems to be a very popular place to be these days.
Yeah, well, it will be until it's in the middle of July and August. Then suddenly it's if you're not on the beach, you really don't want to be here. So, but
yeah, no,
we'll see. Got a couple months to go before that happens. Are we going to see you in Florida anytime soon, or are you now locked down at home with new baby?
Kind of locked down.
Yeah,
kind of locked down at home with the new baby.
I understand.
I mean, hopefully things will, hopefully towards the end of the summer, right? August sometime. I'll get a little unlocked.
A little break.
Yeah,
I'm probably strong. No tour plan down here in South Florida anytime soon.
No, that was the beginning of the year. So I think
remember I was there.
Yeah, Northeast is coming up here in July, and I might be able to sneak out to one or two that are nearby, and then ultimately the last one will be like that kind of, we call it the California Loop, right?
Right.
Yeah, that Phoenix, San Diego, LA, Vegas, like that whole round.
Vegas. Oh, well, now we may have to make a visit. We have to do a cameo at one of those, maybe Vegas.
Well, I mean, listen, you know what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, or at least
including all my money that I end up betting. And so it all stays there also. I don't end up coming home with any of it. So,
well, I mean, that's the whole point, isn't it?
That is the point.
Exactly.
You're right.
So for anybody that doesn't, I don't know how, right? But just for giggles, let's assume somebody watching this never heard of Brad Gross before. Why don't you give them just a little background on yourself, and then we'll get into some like current event stuff.
Sure. So quick way of background for those of you who haven't met me or heard me speak before. I'm a hacker that went to law school and now has a law firm that concentrates and focuses on service industry, technology-based companies, companies that have intellectual property that they either seek to exploit and commercialize or provide a service, a managed service using intellectual property or technology that they then leverage to customers. Maybe they're getting it from VARs, OEMs, and so on. So we represent the gambit of companies in that space. I've been doing it for about 20 years now, and I would say that we have counseled well over 5,000 service providers globally, really, but our reach extends pretty much to every single state in the US. So that's me. And I like to talk, and I have my podcast on these issues at technologybradcast.com.
Not broadcast.
Not broadcast and not podcast. It's technologybradcast.com because I'm very clever in that way. And yeah, it's free and everyone should take a listen to it and learn a lot.
Fantastic. So the headlines always, I mean, now more, I mean, we've been saying it for a long time, but I mean, this year has been fairly wow factor in terms of the general public, right? The average Joe, if you would, on the street, like just paying attention to whatever news outlet that they get stuff from. You know, when the federal government comes out and says, yeah, like this whole ransomware and all this stuff, yeah, it's not going away and it's probably going to get worse, and we're not exactly sure how we can help. I mean, I guess you could take that in one of two ways. I mentioned this to a friend of mine at another vendor in the space. He's like, we should take that message and put it on every billboard, every ad, every email box, right? Like we should, that's good news for the industry. And I'm like,
sure is.
But is the government coming out saying, white flag, hey, sorry, we can't help you? I mean, that kind of opens up the door. It's the invitation, right?
Well, I think that by the government doing that, they're merely stating out loud what everyone in the industry, you, me, and everyone else in the industry has known for quite some time, that extortionists are not going anywhere. Cyber criminals are only getting better and better. And while the government actually has started recently a new task force to go after hackers, to go after groups that would take down and ransom companies throughout the United States, they're always going to be playing a bit of a catch-up game. All right, a little bit of a not even a little bit, always going to be playing a catch-up game. And this goes back to when I was a prosecutor, and I actually started the unit in Miami-Dade County that goes after people like this. And even back then, we were playing catch up, and it really hasn't changed because, as they say, you know, attackers only have to be right once, right? But defenders, people who are defending themselves, putting up the shields, they have to be right every single time. And so you're always going to be a little bit behind the 8 ball. And for that reason, MSPs have to understand and acknowledge that not only is this something that should be emphasized to their customers, but internally, as an MSP, they need to be aware of the fact that they are targets. They are direct vectors to their customers, and as a result, they have to take precautions as well.
So, so this statement by the government, was in reference to the Colonial Pipeline attack,
right?
And 2 interesting stories on that very topic came out this week. Story number 1 was that over many weeks, they said that the security hygiene of said Colonial Pipeline was very bad.
Right.
And that they've tracked the hack back to an employee that was let go or no longer with the company. And this dude was using the same password everywhere, right? His PayPal account, his work email, his whatever. And apparently this guy's email, somebody figured, we see all these massive notices, right? Hey, LinkedIn or whatever, right?
Sure.
This guy's password was out there. Somebody figured out he worked at this company. I guess that doesn't take much these days. You can LinkedIn or Google, whatever. They tried the password. It worked. They were in. Bad things started happening. And there you go. We lost the pipeline for several weeks.
Yeah.
In that very scenario,
and by the way, they're not the only ones that are vulnerable to this. I mean, people are looking at Colonial saying, "Oh my God, what did they do?" And shame on them for having just simply inadequate security practices and procedures in place. But in truth, they are probably not the exception. They are probably the rule, and that's what's scary. And that's, I think, why your buddy said we should be telling everyone this, right? We should be posting this, because that is not the exception. What happened? That's definitely the rule.
100%. So my question is, and look, again, this is speculation, but it's good speculation because, like, and I'm sure you're going to say, what's your agreement say? But in this case, right, like, if you're an MSP managing a customer, you're an IT professional managing this customer,
sure,
and then they turn around and point the finger at you saying, well, why is this person's account still active? And your response is, wait a minute, we give you access to go do this. I don't know every time you hire and fire unless that's part of our protocol with you. Right. We gave you the tools to go in and do this. You didn't do this. Like, don't look at me. And then they're like, well, that's not how we see it. And now all of a sudden we're in a bind.
For sure. For sure. There's definitely going to be finger pointing, at least initially, to protect one's job, right? To protect one's position, to avoid embarrassment and so on. Whether that can be sustained over the long term, meaning can they point to the service provider? Does the service provider have, did the service provider implement the steps which we can talk about to make sure that they are covered? Once that's revealed, obviously it goes back to the company and whether they were willing to implement the protocols that were recommended to them, right? That are just recommended to them.
Like something as simple as a password rotation,
of course.
Or what everybody should have in place at this point, which is some sort of 2-factor or multi-factor.
Of course. I am shocked at how many MSPs come to me and say, listen, I have this customer. They don't want 2FA. They don't want MFA. Why? Too much of a pain in the butt. That's the answer. Really. I mean, that's not even a facetious question, answer. They just consider it a pain. And so they figured that they don't need it or they're not going to be targeted and so on. And then, of course, when something happens, they're going to point the finger at the MSP. For sure. It happens all the time. And then the question is the MSP covered or not? right? Whose liability is it? And now we're in that now what scenario that we always talk about, these situational realities. And you say, this is reality. Reality is we're being blamed for something we didn't do. Now what?
So here's an interesting angle in this. So let's say Colonial did have an MSP. Let's say this exact situation happened, right? Hey, this guy left, nobody shut him off, fingerprinting. What happens if the customer, which could be a Colonial in this case, goes directly to your insurance carrier and files a claim for $5.5 million?
Yeah, that's an issue, right? And then your insurance starts going up and all sorts of bad things happen, because then the insurance company requires the MSP to participate in that, and they want to see all the documents and the records. And now the MSP turns around and thinks, did we do something wrong? Right? Did we? I mean, what's going on? And that process in and of itself is so cumbersome, so tedious, so mentally draining, that it can really drive an MSP's business right into the ground, because it's so distracting. It's so cumbersome. So, you know, again, I know you said sort of tongue in cheek, you knew I was going to say, what's in your agreement? But the truth is that what we're talking about here with regard to cybersecurity is a situational reality. It is one of dozens of realities that are faced by service providers in this industry, unique to this industry. I mean, you know, think of all the service providers, think of law firms and medical service providers and so forth. Any service provider, what other service provider has to worry about security the way MSPs do? What other service provider has to worry about clients that don't listen to them, and as a result have weaknesses and deficiencies in security, in privacy, in confidentiality? What other industry does that occur? Answer: only this one. So this type of issue is something that needs to be addressed.
But I'm going to put an argument out there. I think it's a real one. If the government, with what seemingly is unlimited resources, can't protect themselves, how is anyone else supposed to be? How are you to be reasonably expected to be 100% of the time? I don't think that's realistic.
So what you're pointing out is exactly correct, right? If the government can't do it with almost unlimited resources, how can an MSP? So then the second question to that, the follow-up question, is going to be, that being the case, right? Why? And I guess if an MSP was sitting in front of me or watching me right now, I'd look at them and say, why doesn't your agreement say that? Why don't you make that clear? Why, if the government is willing to say nothing is 100% safe, why are you willing to take the risk that your customer believes they're 100% safe because they've pulled you in, because they're using your solution? And then one more question is, when something happens, and it will happen, whether it's a major issue or a minor issue, something is going to happen. Now, you know, how are you going to answer the now what question? If you don't answer the now what question through your documents, then your documents stink.
So, you know, Dave Sobel, a friendly name in the industry. I think many people have run into him. He has a great podcast as well. MSP Radio, I think it is. He had one recently where he said, why is the vendor always trying to push the risk on the partner, the MSP, rather than taking it themselves? I guess that the answer is because they can. But if you're Microsoft, right, and in your agreement it says, hey, the 365 account that you're using can be made to be secure, but it's up to you to do that. And if you don't call us, it's on you. I mean, that kind of seems to be the general position of almost every vendor out there. Yeah,
well, it is you know, you're right. We're going to begin with the foundational premise that George is always right. There you go. And you're right in that the vendor is pushing off liability because it can. Okay, that's true. But you know what? There's a deeper issue here, and there's a better reason. And the reason is this: vendors have recognized that they're not insurance companies. Okay, they're not insurance companies, and that there always has to be some nexus, some connection between the value of what they're offering and, you know, what it is to them, how much they're making, right, and the risk that they're willing to take on. And even if we look at the insurance industry, we see that this is the way it is. if you have car insurance for $1 million and you're paying $500 a month for that, well, that means that the insurance company has figured out, given the risks and so forth, that for $500, they'll pay out $1 million. But if you hit someone and you're sued for 10 million, you ain't getting 10 million, you're getting 1 million. And you'd say, but you're an insurance company. Why are you pushing the risk on to me? And the answer is, we're pushing the risk onto you because there's only so much risk we're willing to take, because there has to be a connection between value, right, and risk. And I think that vendors are doing that, and MSPs have to do that as well.
I was just about to say that. So if that crap rolls downhill, okay, if the vendor pushes it to the MSP and then the MSP try, logically would put that similar language because it's being pushed onto them to the end customer, what happens when the end customer pushes back saying, no, I need you to take liability or I won't take this deal? Walk away?
Well, so where law and business meet, it's not always a perfect fit, right? And there are two ways to approach it. The easy way is to simply say, we're not doing it, right? The easy way is just to simply say, we're not willing to take on that kind of risk. We're willing to take on the lion's share of risk, but not uncapped liability. Yeah. That's one way to do it. But that's very easy for someone to say when we're sitting here and not in the position of an MSP that's trying to get its momentum going, trying to get some business inertia behind it, right? And is trying to bring in some revenue. So what's the other way to approach it? Well, two other ways to approach it. One, you can limit your liability to the insurance limits, right? Think of it that way. You could limit your liability to your insurance limits, but not just to your insurance limits, to the limits that are actually paid out, to the amounts that are actually paid out. And there's a very big difference. If I have $1 million policy and I say my liability is at my insurance limits, well, what's my insurance limit? $1 million. Okay, so you cover $1 million. Well, no, I meant it's up to $1 million if it's paid out, but that's not what I just said, right? So you have to make sure that your contract, if you're going to go with the insurance paradigm, you need to make sure that it says we are willing to extend our liability to the amounts actually paid out by an insurance policy under an applicable claim, or some other amount. 6 months worth of services, 12 months.
I was just about to say, I've seen many times throughout my journey where an agreement will say, you cannot sue us for more than the value of the contract.
And that is the usual way that people go about doing these things. And, that's where you're going to get into negotiation, because a lot of companies say, well, what if the value of the contract is only 50 grand, but you do something from a confidential or security protocol breach that runs me $500,000. Where's the fairness? Where's the justice? Mm-hmm. Usually MSPs are carrying $1 million or more liability, in which case you can say, look, if you're going to come after us because we can't put in an insurance claim, right, then we're going to limit it. But if it goes under our insurance, that's why we have insurance, we're willing to offer you, unlimited up to whatever the insurance pays out.
I guess occurrence is the word, right? Because you can have
on an occurrence basis, exactly. So, that's how you negotiate, and generally that will bring the conversation to a good and amicable end. Because maybe the follow-up question would be, all right, well, show us your policy. Right, show us what we're talking about, and assuming you have general and error and omission and cyber piracy and extortion and all kinds of things, they'd say, okay, that makes sense. That's why we all have insurance, and that's how you bring that to an end. But in their zeal to get deals done, MSPs often will offer caps that are just extraordinary and not connected in any way to the value of the contract. That should be avoided.
Yeah, I agree. They have to limit as well. So Owen pops in here, who's on the chat. He says, I think a SOC report is a great tool to manage internal and external risk. What are your thoughts? Well, stitching it back, because Brad's a kind of legal guru, so trying to take at it from that lens, take a look at it from that lens. This comes back to like, what is and this is a very vague word, so I like to bring a vague statement, and this is why I bring it up all the time. It's like, what is the industry standard, right? What is the best practice? What is the accepted, situation, right? And unfortunately, that can be taken apart and cut up and glued back together 80 different ways. And now all of a sudden, what he thinks a good way to manage it, and what they say they thought should have happened don't line up, and now we're back again in front of a judge somewhere.
Well, so first of all, you have to understand that there are a couple of things going on. A SOC report is a great way because it guarantees, assuming that you are capable of being, excuse me, of acquiring a SOC report, right? Passing the certification, getting a SOC report, and so on, which is an expensive endeavor. That's not something that most MSPs will say, oh, we'll just get somebody to do certify our processes. We'll get a SOC report type 2 and we're good to go.
Right. Just to be clear, you're talking about like, hey, I'm going to go get SOC certified as an MSP, SOC 1. These are actual industry things, right? Versus
Correct.
I have an outside security operations center vendor who's providing me a report, right?
Right. And that's the situation. So, what you need to make clear when you're selling a service, and this comes from not just a business perspective, but a legal perspective as well, is there's a difference between providing a service and reselling a service. Okay. And that can make all the difference when it comes to talking to your customer about how much liability you're willing to take on and, where the risks and responsibilities exist. When you are providing a security solution, 99% of the time, you are not providing a solution. You are reselling a solution. A third-party provider is providing the solution.
Yeah.
You are reselling it. You are not contracting. You're not a contractor. You're not a subcontractor. You are a reseller. And as such, you shouldn't be taking on the responsibility of saying, well, we're SOC compliant. Well, you're incurring a whole lot of cost for what? You're reselling a solution. You have nothing to do with this. So what you may want to point out to your customers is that the solution provider that you're using, pick it, throwing out names, not endorsing anybody, just ConnectWest, Continuum, Kaseya, StorageCraft, whatever, Ninja, any of whoever's provided Barracuda or Cronus, name your solution, right? They have certifications, they are compliant, and you want to make it clear to your customers that you're merely the conduit through which the sale transaction occurs. And you're there to help facilitate that service to your client. Maybe you'll be troubleshooting, maybe you're providing support services, level 1 type stuff. But at the end of the day, MSPs that turn around and say, I'm going to become SOC certified. And so I think that they first should think about it from the terms of what's your relationship and do you even need to go there? And then make it clear to your customer through your contracts what the relationship is, who is providing the service, and where the responsibilities.
I'm going to tell you right there, Brad. I've run across hundreds and hundreds of MSPs who are like, oh no, if I could white label everything, I would. If Microsoft would let me white label Office 365, it would be George 365. Like, if they could, they will. But then all of a sudden, from the view of the customer, they are the ultimate be all end all. And let's face it, if Amazon goes down or Microsoft goes down, those are problems way bigger than anything they can handle.
Of course. And you shouldn't be taking on, as a service provider, you should not be taking on responsibility for any of that. You could say that you will help, should a third-party service go down, you'll help facilitate a workaround if one is available, right? But you are not warranting or guaranteeing that the third-party service is going to remain viable, functional, that the certifications that those third parties hold are, what they said. They are what they are. This is it. We're reselling Amazon Web Service. You want to know what Amazon does? Go look. Here's the website where they talk about their certifications and their security protocols and all. We're reselling Azure. You want to know what Microsoft does? Go here. But don't take that burden on yourself as a service provider.
So almost
it's not necessary.
Almost in the agreement, you're doing the exact opposite of white labeling. You're like, hey, here's all the vendors that are currently involved. There may be more. We may add vendors over time, but understand that they're responsible for each of their individual solutions. We're packaging this and offering it to you.
Right. You see, a white label solution is wonderful from a business perspective because it really looks like this is branded with your service and so on. But you also have to remember that when that happens, clients are going to expect that you're responsible for everything that happens with that. So it's one thing to brand it. It's another thing at the contract level to make it very clear that while these services are branded as the Bardisi services or the Brad Gross services or whatever, they're actually third-party providers that have their own terms of service, their own acceptable use policies and so forth, all of which are binding, all of which may influence our relationship, and it modifies the responsibilities and the liabilities of the parties. This is the stuff that needs to be considered when you're writing an MSA, when you're writing a statement of work, when you're entering into these kinds of arrangements.
So Owen comes back and says, great point, Brad. SOC reports are way too expensive. Agree. I can foresee increased need for independent report by all types of services. This gets, I mean, this is very interesting, right? Because
all types of services.
How often is the MSP getting audited by an independent third party? Not that often.
Not often at all.
The end customer, depending on their vertical, may, right? Like if they're a financial services company or a medical practice or and there's a government contractor, right? I think CMMC now has some sort of actual third party that will come and audit you now. Before it was kind of like, hey, you do it on your own, we'll take your word for it. Now there's actually somebody that will do it and come and actually audit you. But how often is that? And maybe that's going to be a requirement in the near future, right? That in order to work in these areas, you have to do it too.
Right. And I'll tell you, so from, was it Owen? You said Owen made that? Okay. So Owen, I think that your idea is not as far-fetched as maybe some people think, because I think that auditing from a security and a privacy perspective is important, and it's all the rage these days and so on. I have and do all the time legal audits, all the time. We come in and we do an audit of your agreements, of your statements of work, of the vendor agreements that you have, of the license agreements that are in place and so on, because all of that comes into play, right? All of it comes into play. So I think that legal audits, security audits, and so on, yeah, I think they're very important. They're already out there. And if MSPs aren't taking advantage of that, they should. It'll at the very least probably lower your insurance costs if you point out to your company that you went through the process. But I could see a future where there are audits on specialized areas, not just security related, but any other area in which service provider is engaged. Sure.
Yeah. So it'll be really interesting to see, like, so going back a little bit full circle, on this whole government coming out, the United States of America, federal government, current administration said, well, hey, yeah, so this is going to be all over the place. We don't know if we're going to be able to help you.
Right.
We'll do what we can. But then a second, press conference was like, well, we'll start taking ransomware incidents as if it was a terrorist act. I mean, it's how what do you do every time somebody gets hit with ransomware? You're going to report it to the Department of Defense. Like, how does that work?
I think that was just a knee-jerk reaction to the political and social, pressures and emotions that are going on right now. It's interesting. I teach a course on cybersecurity, corporate cybersecurity practices, what companies should be doing. I teach it at a law school down here about what companies should be doing from a cybersecurity perspective to comply with the law. And one of the things that we talk about in that course, and I talk about all the time in webinars like this, is the intersection between security and privacy. Okay. And it's funny that the people want both. Right? They want both, but sometimes one displaces the other, right? What do I mean by that? So if I want to secure your network, okay, if I want to secure your network, I might say, George, I have to monitor your network for the next week. I need to know everything you're doing, every site you're going to, right? In incognito mode or otherwise. I need to know everything because then, right, exactly, because then I could give you the ultimate security. You'd say, well, you're invading my privacy. Right. Well, I got to invade your privacy to give you security, and vice versa. Sometimes by giving you so much security, right, I need to know certain things about you, which invades your privacy. The point is, these things, it's sort of a yin and yang. Okay. Now, how does this all relate to ransomware and so on? People aren't, first of all, thinking about in terms of the yin and yang. So they're always shocked when these ransomware things, how could this happen? How could it happen? Well, it happens because companies go through the same analysis that you go through in your own, in your own personal world, which is how much privacy am I willing to give up for security, and vice versa, right? How much are we willing to do? When is enough enough?
I guess
And
the,
so,
I guess the X factor there, Brad, is how many times did somebody read the 400-page Apple agreement or whatever, right? It's like, I didn't
right,
even realize I was giving up my privacy, but I guess I am, because
right,
800 pages down, it said I was.
100% right. And so, these ransomware attacks are occurring because companies are sort of at the same crossroads as people are, right? How much privacy, how much security are we willing to give up? When is enough enough? At what point does the cost benefit analysis weigh in favor of, let's just keep doing what we're doing and not, engage too heavily into solutions that might avoid this kind of thing? And so, all these emotions are kind of interlinked, and there's political forces and economic forces. And that's why when this kind of thing happens, government spokesman might come out and say, we should treat these like terrorists. Really? I mean, what are we going to go to orange alert or high alert because of a ransomware?
Could you
You
imagine?
can't treat them as terrorists. I mean, you could think of them as terrorists. That's what they are. They're acting like, but they're not really terrorists. They are people who are taking advantage of the yin and yang between security and privacy, and looking at where the two touch and figuring out how to get in between them. That's where we have to aim.
So we've had a bunch of responses. Let me make one point here before
Okay.
I get into them. So the government did get 4.4 million back from the 5.5 million ransom from. Oh, by the way, that was a Bitcoin wallet, and Bitcoin.
Yeah. They tracked the wallet, I think, or something like that.
So funny enough, right? They didn't transfer it out right away, like you would
Go
think.
figure.
But
you would have thought that the hackers would know that could be done. But all right.
Well, now all of a sudden it's not as easy to hide your money. So if you're not paying taxes on that crypto wallet there, you should probably think about that.
It's another webinar. That's another webinar.
We should. You know what? We're going to book that one right after this one. So Owen came back and said, context: cloud computing interdependence is growing exponentially, and our way of life is changing. Trust is needed to get business and reduce insurance premium. Thanks, guys, for your thoughts. He's not wrong.
Nope, not wrong at all.
He's not wrong. Bottom line is, if it's a necessity and you have to use that highway and you're going to have to pay a toll to do so, you got to make sure that, you lower your risks as you're driving down that road.
100%.
100%. So a bunch of stuff came in here. So our favorite MSP Initiative Ask Her Questioner attendee, Brent, says, what does that do to cyber insurance? I think he was talking about, because his next question really clarifies. Like, so what you're saying is, for marketing purposes, we should brand our solution, but for legal reasons, we should leave the manufacturer name on the solution. Why do we have so many contradictions to this hurdle?
Okay, so why do you have so many contradictions? Because you have litigators out there, and I hate them. I'm a self-loathing attorney. But to answer your questions specifically, I'm okay with you branding a service, right? Your complete silver plan, complete gold, whatever you want to call it, the ultimate, whatever it is. And you brand it and you push it out that way and so on. I'm good with that. But I think that from a legal perspective, okay, think of it like a car, like a really awesome looking car, like a Lamborghini or a Ferrari or something that you look at the outside, okay, and you say, oh my God, it's sleek looking. Look at the curves and all. It looks like it's almost one big piece of metal or, whatever it's made of, a carbon fiber, and it's just beautiful. Then you open up the engine and you have 10,000 parts in there, right? 10,000 different things to make that beautiful thing go, okay? Think of your service like that. You can make it look beautiful. You can make it look pretty attractive. People will look and say, oh, he has the ultimate gold plan security, this and that. Wonderful. I hope it looks great. I hope it's red and it looks like it flows like a Lamborghini. But at the end of the day, you need an engine, okay? Because you ain't going anywhere without that engine. The same with your agreements. You're not going anywhere unless that agreement is written properly. And just like a Lamborghini has to think about what goes into the engine, you need to think about what goes into that agreement. And I'm telling you that while I don't think that you have to identify the manufacturers specifically, I don't think you have to say, I'm giving you a whatever solution it is, because then theoretically you're locking yourself in and you may want to change, right? I do think that you need to point out that services are being resold, even services that are branded under a different name are the property or the services of a different provider. I think that you need to point out that the provider themselves are going to be not only providing these services, but limit the responsibilities. And I also think that you need to point out that you have the ability to change those providers, that in a way that may not be transparent to your client, but in a way that won't diminish their services, right? So if I'm providing you with a bright light and I want to switch to a different light bulb, as long as that light doesn't get diminished, I can switch. So it's almost the opposite of what you were suggesting, where you have to list the manufacturers. I would say don't list the manufacturers, but put something in there that says you can change them if you want to, as long as your features, functions, and so forth aren't diminished.
If you went from an Office 365 to a Google Workplace, right? As long as all the features are in parallel, then technically you still meet the requirements.
Of course, as long as they're substantially the same, no diminishment in function or features, that's great. But again, I think that, you know, your question of why do we need such a complicated engine? The same reason why Lamborghini needs a complicated engine, because if you want it to go fast and run well, then you need that engine powering it. So unfortunately, in my world, those engines are words. Okay.
So Brent, follow-up question, then we'll get to Jeffrey. He says, so where do you put this? Is this in the MSA or is this in the scope of work? Like, where
do we put what? What are we talking about? Are we put it about
commentary about the fact that there's upstream vendors, you didn't manufacture these solutions, you know, you're reselling some of these, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep. So I might be selling you an RMM solution from Kaseya. Okay. I might be selling you a BDR solution from Acronis.
Yeah.
I might be selling you a dark web monitoring solution from KnowBe4. And I'm just throwing out vendors again, no endorsement, just okay. My point is my vendors change, right? My vendors might change. Therefore, the specific service and the specific vendors don't go in your MSA because your MSA shouldn't change. But what doesn't change? The fact that I'm providing you with a third-party service very often. That doesn't change. It might be a different company from time to time, but it doesn't change. The fact that I might change that vendor from time to time, that's pretty much universal, right? The fact that there are differing levels of responsibility and services depending on what's being resold, that's pretty much universal too. All that stuff goes in your MSA. Anything that doesn't change, anything that is global, I may offer you a third-party solution provider. I might not identify it as a solution provider from a third party, but I'm telling you, some of these services might be. Contact us if you want information. That's MSA. That's MSA. The actual service itself goes in a statement of work or a scope of work or however, you know, whatever term you want to use.
Okay. So Jeffrey Lee, I think he has interesting comments, maybe not questions. He says ransomware occurs because criminals know they are not going to be shot. You should treat them like bank robbers. Rob a bank, get shot. Well, you're
okay.
not
okay.
you're not
sounds good.
He also says, I'm not even, yes, vendors will get acquired. That's for sure. I won't even name the vendor, but for sure. Brent says, I love this guy. Well, there you go, Brad. A little bit of love there.
Back at you.
He says, shouldn't be shot, public stoning. Same result. So there's that.
Well, I mean, you know, it's interesting. There is a debate, just as a quick aside, about whether retaliatory actions against hackers would be justified by the private sector, and whether the government should actually hire private sector to go after these people who are attacking government computers and so on. The idea being that the government's great and they have wonderful people and all, but even the government is limited in its size and capacity. But what if you just started deputizing, right? Some hacker groups, just start deputizing them and saying, listen, gentlemen, $1 million to whoever takes this group out or whatever it is. And there's a lot of articles, I've read quite a few. It dates back to the 1800s, in which the American colonies would deputize private citizens to go after people that were attacking them. And the question is, why can't that be applied to today? And the answer is, I think it could. I actually think it could be. And I'm not necessarily against it. You know,
Very
coming as a former prosecutor and cyber prosecutor, I could tell you that I'm not necessarily against deputizing those who you can trust to go after the bad people.
So Jeff comes back. He says, Jeffrey comes back, says, Blackwater will do the job. Hire the mob. Okay. All right.
Wow, are we devolving here? Suddenly we've just taken a weird turn.
And then he said, and then Brent comes and says, retaliation, like the guys that made an app that they created for a denial of service attack on spammers. Well,
Yeah.
listen, I mean, like it's funny, right? There's still, jets and warcrafts and bombs and laser things that they've come out with, and like there's still a military, but seems like the fight has moved from in person on the ground or in the ocean or in the air to on the wire.
On the wire, no doubt.
And there's got to be retaliation at some point, or else it's just an open door, which is where I started off with. Why say, well, it's going to happen, and it's going to get worse, and there might not be anything we can do about it. I feel like that's just a wide open, hey, here's the front door, it's wide open, feel free, come on.
Right. No, I agree. And see, the question is, where do MSPs stand in all of this, right? And what should they do? And how do they educate their clients? And I'm going to work backwards by saying, instead of how should they educate their clients, let's take the word how out of that and just say they should educate their clients. Their clients really don't understand this. You and I discussed this stuff, and you read the same, probably similar article that I read this morning about how we got, a couple million back from the hackers and so on. But the person running the dental office that hired the MSP, he or she didn't read that article.
Not coming to their
right, isn't up to date with this kind of stuff, doesn't understand. All he or she knows is that Mrs. Jones is coming in for a root canal later, and how come I can't pull up her digitized records and so on, and where's my MSP, and why is my stuff locked all of a sudden? That's their world. You see, we operate in our world and they operate in theirs, and you need that Rosetta Stone, right? You need that middleware, okay, that middleware that sits between you and that dental office, in this case, that says, listen, you don't even know it because you're a wonderful dentist, but you're not a technology guy. Here's what's going on in the world. Bad stuff, okay? And you need to address it, and it might cost you a few dollars, and it might, be a pain in the butt that you have to use 2FA or MFA or whatever you want to, implement. But there's bad stuff going on. Where I see the deficiency, the weakness, is that Rosetta Stone. MSPs are not doing a wonderful job on whole, translating that to the client. So there's a lot of mismanaged expectations. There's a lot of price shopping, because they think, oh, well, you want, $50 a workstation, but I could get it for 42. Yeah, but they're not giving you MFA. Oh, well, that might be true, but I don't really need MFA. I'm a dentist. Really?
I just went through a similar thing. It's like, hey, your price looks lower, but you unbundled this, and this, and by the time you add it back in, it's actually more. So
right.
we're back. We're even worse than where we started, right?
Yeah, it's sort of like, who does a horrible job at it, and I think purposely, the airlines, those low-cost airlines, let's say, shall we say, without naming them, the ones that say, oh, you can fly it from Fort Lauderdale to Colorado for $80. $80. I can't even drive from here to Jacksonville for $80, but it costs more in gas until you look. Oh, well, if you're going to bring a knapsack, that's $25. And if you want to bring a luggage, that's $50, right? Oh, and if you want a soda, that's $300 for a can of soda, whatever it is. And the point is, once you add it back in, you realize, oh, it's actually costing me $250 to fly, which is pretty much what Delta charges, or any other airline. So I think that middleware, while the airlines are purposely misleading people to hopefully get them to sign up and fly with them, I don't think MSPs have the luxury of misleading. And I'm not suggesting they're purposely misleading, but I think they don't have the luxury of having a mismanaged expectation. There's too much at risk. There's security, there's privacy at risk, there's business at risk. You guys don't have the luxury, okay? You need a Rosetta Stone. That's what you need to implement.
But it's also important from a marketing standpoint, right? Like you hear all the time, hey, yeah, this is misleading marketing, or you said you're a bait and switch, right? You said you're giving me this and I got this, right? And that's when listen, we've heard MSPs, by the way, Brent says middleware, great analogy. It is. As MSPs, we always hear I call them the keyboard warrior say, oh, the vendor told me this and they never delivered on their marketing message and it never met the expectation. No pane of glass never occurred. Well, but like, just as much as you can complain about your vendor, your customer can surely complain about your marketing to them.
Of course,
So,
of course, of course. So I think that, MSPs would be well advised to not only provide more information to their customers and alert them to the risk, coming full circle to what you said your buddy said today about we should put this government statement, we should broadcast it to
every billboard and every mailbox, on every text messaging, but like basically this is great. His feeling was, this is great for the IT industry. We should broadcast this.
It sure is. And then go further to say, if people are trying to question why you're offering the packages that you're offering, tell them why. Don't just say two-factor authentication allows a second authentication method to make sure you're safe. I mean, that's all well and good. I would combine it with a case study. I would do something because they don't get it. I had a law professor who would say things like, all right, you're driving a car, you go through a stop sign. What happened? What is that? And, lost it. Say, oh, that's illegal. It's a violation of the traffic code and blah, blah, blah. And he'd listen and say, yeah, so what? So what? So it's a violation. So what? What does that mean? Oh, well, what it means is you could be pulled over and you're going to be held for an hour while the cop does what he does. And then you have to go to traffic court. You might have to hire a lawyer. And if it gives you points on your license, your insurance goes up, right? That's a case study. That is going to stop me from going through a stop sign. Not if you go through a stop sign, you're violating the law. Yeah. Okay. But I was in a rush. I mean, right? Unless you got to lay it out. And I think that what MSP's customers aren't receiving is a laid out version of what they're getting and why they're getting it and why it's important. And I think that the more that MSPs provide case studies and situational descriptions of what's going on, the more they're going to manage expectations, the fewer problems they're going to have, fewer calls to lawyers. And by the way, they could probably charge more. You could charge more, right? When you describe everything and you have somebody going, oh my God, this is horrendous. I need this, as opposed to, well, it gives you better security because it's going to send you a text message and then you can log in with 2FA.
Right.
Okay. But what if I don't have my phone? Or what if my phone is dead? Or what if
you might have bigger problems if you lost your phone that often.
What's that?
I said you might have bigger problems if you lose your phone that often.
Yeah, that's true too.
You're right. I guess you get one of those Tile or Apple Air badges or whatever. Let me ask you this. I had true story, right?
Yeah.
Now, I told the vendor today, I said, they called up, they're like, you owe us this. I said, oh, I do. They're like, yeah, our terms of service say this. And I said, I don't care what your terms of service say. You know what's above your terms of service? The law. If it's legal, then your terms of service could be nothing. And that's what I'm telling you. I don't care what your terms of service say. You never delivered the service. I don't owe you the money. It's just that. How true is that?
How true? Well, I don't know your exact scenario. I didn't get the call from George saying, Brad, I got a problem.
All right, we'll talk after. But no.
Exactly.
By the way, it was $100. I was like, I would pay if I owed it, but I don't. So if you want to go to court, let's talk about the law. You never delivered the service. I don't owe you the money. That's it.
I'll tell you this. I'll tell you that, yeah, people, contracting is one thing, service is another. If a service isn't provided, then you don't need to be Copernicus to know this. If you have a contract, party A is going to provide a service, party B is going to provide it. Party B doesn't provide it, it divests party A of the requirement to pay, meaning that's the way it goes. And then the question is one of nuances. Well, was it provided? How well was it provided? Did you raise a material breach? Did you tell us it wasn't provided? And so on. But I'll tell you that from a MSP perspective, okay, I think that what you'll find is that clients, sort of reversing your situation, clients will often try to threaten MSPs with, oh, I'm going to have my lawyer call you and I'm going to sue you because you didn't do this and that. If you have the right agreement in place, okay, these are handled fairly routinely, right? Fairly routinely. If you say, for example, that if there's a material breach, you have to notify us. And Then they have to notify you. If you say, listen, if you stop your service without cause, you're going to end up paying the rest of that service fee for the balance of the term. And by the way, if we have to pursue you for it, we're going to get the prevailing party gets his or her attorney's fees. These are the ways that you come back as an MSP and say, don't threaten me, don't tell me, right? You can't just turn around and say, well, I was unhappy in the way this service was provided, so I think I'm just canceling this 3-year deal. MSPs, if you have the right agreement in place, you can have some backbone. On the flip side, of course, like your situation, if they're not providing the service, well, you could have any contract you want. That's that, right? Well, I mean, we'll battle that all day long.
So it comes back to communication, but I love, in a theoretical conversation where somebody's trying to get out because, right, and they're just like,
right.
We didn't do this, and you're like, well, you never reported that, so like, when did you say I didn't do that? Oh, like last year. Well, that's moot then. You had 30 days to report a breach of the agreement. You did it.
Right.
So,
assuming that your agreement says that. Because
yeah.
if they don't, well, then you're going to start getting into all kinds of things like statute of limitations says I have 5 years to report it and blah, 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 blah. And okay, now we're in it. So you don't want that. That's why, again, it's important that after you listen to webinars like this and so on, you go back to your agreements, you make sure that the things that we're talking about are discussed and addressed in your agreement, right? I gave you advice to do something, you didn't listen to me, that's not on me. Well, what does your agreement say about that?
Brent specifically said, I think we need to talk about offboarding clauses and expenses for offboarding.
Yeah. Sure do. Sure do. Offboarding, it relates to the end, right? And nobody likes to think about the end at the beginning or even in the middle, because who wants to talk about the end? But the end is something that must be addressed in your documents. And so whether it is something as simple as returning hardware or telling the client, do not remove software agents, right? We see this a lot where a client will say, all right, I don't like George anymore. I'm out of here. And they'll hire a new IT company that will remove the agents, but not disable them, right? Just sort of remove them, which means that billing is continuing. And sometimes the vendor says, I can't even stop the billing. I mean, I don't know what to do here, right? So you need to think about the end. Don't remove our software agents. Don't disable them. We have to do that. If you have equipment that has to be returned, right? Transition services, are they free? Are they free or are they not free? By the way, think about when they're going to be offered. Most times, transition services are not offered in the context of, you are a wonderful person, I'm just going a different way, so, let me pay you what I owe you and we're out. No, most of the time it's, I don't like you, I don't like the service that you provided, I think that you failed me and you didn't do what you said you'd do, I'm not paying you, and by the way, I want my stuff back. That's where you find yourself at the end very often. If your contract doesn't think about that situational reality, well, you're just going to face it and you're on your own. And then it's going to cost you money. So yeah, it's a great point. Offboarding services, the end transition, all needs to be addressed. We could do a whole hour on that.
Right after we do the
Sure.
crypto, right? Because that'll be the next.
That's right. That's exactly right.
So while we're in like the final kind of stretch here, any other questions that you guys have, shoot them through. We'll fast fire if we get a bunch. Here's an interesting one, Brad, that's worthwhile. So I had an MSP tell me the other day that they're under the 3-year agreement. Their customer brought in a third party. Okay. And the third party's like, well, in order to do what this customer hired me to do, I need all of this access. Right.
Yeah.
And of course, the MSP's like, well, wait a minute. I can't just give you God mode access to everything because I'm still responsible for this. And if you do something, then I'm in trouble. So, so he actually asked questions like, what should I do? I was like, you should write up, number one, you need to talk with the actual customer, right? Who's in the middle of this, and explain, hey, here's the deal. Like, I'm trying to protect both of us here, right? I understand the third party is coming in to do a specific thing, but like, I need to make sure that I'm not on the hook or we all don't derail, right? Because of this project, right? So like, should I have an agreement written between now the MSP and the third party as far as what they're going to get access to, or really an agreement between the end customer and the third party?
So that's the thing. Usually the third party, the other provider, if you will, is going to be not quick or not, will be hesitant to enter into an agreement with you, because why should we? Why should we? I mean, we're hired by customer. I candidly see your point. This is what they would say, right? I see your point, vendor, but I don't know you, and I'm not entering into another contract, and I'm not paying a lawyer to look at it. So that will lead to a dead end. What you need to do is what you're describing is the co-managed situation, right? Where you're co-managing an environment, or you're even if you're not managing it, you're engaged in the same environment where others are playing in the sandbox. And what you need to do is either be able to define very clearly what you're going to do and what you're not going to do. Okay. Also, you need to say what happens if something goes wrong, right? Then where do we go to determine what happened? And at that point, you should be able to say, listen, you gave us keys to the house, you gave them keys to the house. The cookie jar is broken. I didn't do it. They say they didn't do it. Now what? Well, the answer is you're going to have to rely on our logs. I mean, that's part of the risk that you're taking, customer, by giving them keys to the house and us keys to the house. That's the way it is, right? You're going to have to rely on our logs, our data, our records. That said, I would say that the vendors need open communication for sure, to avoid mismanaged expectations. But the co-managed environment presents very unique situations where you also have to think about who has ultimate authority. You want to do A, other vendor wants to do B, their intention with each other. Who makes the call? Who makes the call, especially if there's an urgent or exigent situation? You might say, look, I'll work in a co-managed environment, but if something happens, you look to our logs to see if it's our fault. If something needs to be done and there is a conflict between us and vendor, we have the ultimate authority, not that vendor. I mean, these are the things you need to think about. It happens all the time. It's a creature of contract, and it can be handled.
And these scenarios pop up, or some version of them, every single day.
And that's what I'm saying to you. That's why it goes back to what I was saying earlier. What industry has all these situational realities? You know, have you ever heard of an accountant's office that has different accounting firms working in the same room? No, that doesn't happen, right? But you do in the IT industry, right? You might have one vendor doing one thing, one vendor doing another in the same room on the same system. Unique situational reality. That's what you need to think about when you're dealing with your customers, and translate that to them, because they don't get it. They're not stupid. They just don't get it because they're thinking about, you know, accounting or dentistry or construction or pharmacy or whatever they're doing.
And listen, let's be also fair. The judges that you ultimately may find yourself in front of may be even worse on understanding what the hell you're talking about.
Far worse. Far worse. They just got a new iPad. They're happy that they, you know, have figured out how to get to the settings without calling their grandchild. So yeah, these are the things you need, that Rosetta Stone for sure.
100%. Well, Jeffrey Lee leaves us with Mr. Gross is brilliant. I agree. Totally concur.
Thank you. Now tell that to my kids. Somehow I have to convey that to them. They don't believe it.
By the way, Brad is a very good cook. Apparently, he has his own cooking social media file.
That's true. I do know. Did you know that? I didn't know that you knew that.
If you can find it, Brad is his own little Chef Boyardee, Chef Boyardee, not D. And you know, I don't even.
Brad the Rad Dad. That's it.
I can warm up stuff and hit Chick-fil-A.
That's good. Yes, Brad the Rad Dad Chef Edition on Instagram. It's there if you find it.
There you go. So for anyone that thinks it would be worth talking to Brad, have him take a look at your stuff, give you, you know, consultation. Maybe he can give you some tips and tell you that you need to clean up a couple things to make sure you're okay. Where can they find you, Brad?
Oh, where can they find me? Well, first, the website, which is just my name, bradleygross.com. Go to technologybradcast.com if you want to hear the podcasts. Email brad@bradleygross.com, or call us at 954-217-6225. And look forward to talking to everyone.
Awesome. Well, we'll do our best to bring Brad back occasionally, because every time we do, we always get into some sort of interesting conversation. But the next one will be about crypto, because that seems to be
it. Absolutely.
All right. Appreciate everybody for watching. Remember, 1 o'clock, Tuesdays, Thursdays, Eastern time, every week, mostly. And stay tuned for the next round of the Channel Strong Tour that's coming to the Northeast, right? DC through Boston. going up 95. So if you're in that Northeast corridor, like Maryland, Delaware, DC, PA, New Jersey, so on and so on and so on, keep an eye at mspinitiative.com under Channel Strong, and you'll see all the dates coming up for the next round, which is at the end of July. We'd love to see you in person, safely, of course. And don't forget to throw your name into the hat under our giveaways page as well. 10 prizes every month. If you don't enter, you can't win. All right, guys. Appreciate for watching, and stay tuned for the next one. Take it
Thanks,
easy.
George. Take care.